Hey Patron, what's good? I was just making this song, and I figured because I've done like a 5 layered snare that I would show you guys sort of how I go about this, because I know layering snares and just snares in general, it's a big part of drum and bass. Your snare needs to hit, it needs to knock, it needs to really mold with the track well, and it's a struggle. It's difficult to find good samples, and layering can be sort of difficult unless you are at a higher level of production. So I'm going to show you what I've done here. So this is just out of an upcoming single from the 100 Bangers from Scratch Part 3. So this is the drum beat. So if I solo the snare, so basically when you layer a snare, each individual layer wants to be doing something different to the other layers. This allows you to not cause clashing between the different instruments. And it also means that they build on each other. They don't just sort of amplify, if you get what I mean. So for this snare, the first one I took is... This one's actually one of my snares from an unreleased track called Rewind, which is coming out later this year. Now, from that one, I didn't want to just use the snare again, so I actually just took the mid-bass region. So I've done an EQ8 here, and you can see I'm just soloing this sort of like fundamental that the snare has. I'm also fading it in a little bit at the start because, and you'll see further down that I want the transient, the one with the sort of upper end click, to just be in that spot. So I've faded all of these out, but yeah, I have like this sort of mid-low region that I've done here. And then going on to the next one. So this is like a noisier snare from one of the new noisier packs. I think it's, yeah, the V2 pack. So this is a similar one, but you can see the fundamental from this. It's not sitting, the other one was sitting at about, what? Maybe like 700-800 hertz. This one, the fundamental, it's closer down to about 300 hertz. So that's not clashing with the other one. And what I really like about this one is that it has this like metallic sort of feel to it. So it gives you a little bit of a real life drum. Now when I put those together, see without the first one, it's lacking a bit in that mid region. But together they complement each other. The third one is from an excellent pack. And all this is sort of like what I've done is it used to sound like this. Right, see, that's like a very low, that's like a classic sort of DnB snare that you'll hear in like dance floor DnB and stuff like that. Now, I like those. I think they drive the track along quite well, mainly because, they're sort of weighty and they have that upper end sort of tail that hiss to them. But I personally don't go for that in my tracks, whereas a lot of drum and bass producers do. You guys will know from my tracks, the snares are a lot snappier and more like trap style ones. Now, basically what I did here is I just high passed this because all I wanted was this little hiss, this like noisy part of the top. So again, if we put on 1 plus 2, then we add this one. See, now we're getting that sort of like upper end spectrum, like noisy area filled out. So then I've gone down and layered another one. Now this is also one from the noisier pack. So it used to sound like this. Now again, this is a metallic one, similar to the one further up, but I'm using it in a different way. For starters, I'm adding a bunch of reverb on. So I've put the low cut and high cut on so that you can see the reverbs attacking not the low area, but more like the mids and highs. And I've upped the decay to about 1 point, just, it's not too high. So there's a little bit of decay and ring out on it, but we don't want it too long because otherwise they'll clash too much. And then what I've done is I've also just high passed this. Because all I wanted was that upper end sort of reverb hiss. So again, 1 plus 2, then you add on the top layer, and now you add on the reverb. See, now you've got that sort of spatial aspect to it. Adding a bit of reverb to drums is good because our bodies and our minds are naturally tuned to hearing drums in a real life sense. So they always have reverb. So that's a trick for your snares, is to make sure that you have a little bit of reverb somewhere so that it sounds more familiar to your ear in like a natural sense. So again, now I have another noisier one, and all this is doing again is adding noise. So similar to this one up here, see, that's adding noise with a little bit of punch in the mid region. This one, that has less punch in the mid region. So together they complement each other. This one also has less high information. So if I go again, 1 plus 2 plus 3, add the reverb, and now we add another high one. And then the last one that I've added on here, and you'll notice here also that I've dropped that down. I've dropped these bottom 3 down by 9 dB. So that's like a significant drop. So not only am I taking the snare and EQing it in a certain way, but I'm also dropping the volume. Because if you just chuck in a bunch of snares all at the same volume, it's just going to like crush your, like it's going to boost the dB up way too much. Now you'll notice all of these are faded in. Now the reason is because for this last layer, again, another noisier snare. Now this one is just the tick. It's like the click at the start of the snare. You'll notice there's a lot of high-end information going on, and I didn't want that to be clashing with the start of any of these other ones. Now, so what I've done is I've just high-passed it, so it's only that initial little click that goes on. And you'll hear, if I solo everything else without that, it sounds alright, but then you add that click, now, it's pretty hard to hear, but it does make a difference, and I can personally hear it. So then when you put that all together, you get like a really nice snare that has low-end punch, it has a mid-punch, it has your upper-end sort of hiss and drive. It has a nice click at the start, and then it has a bit of reverb to add that natural sort of feel to it. Now, I've grouped all of these together, and then what I've done is I put a few effects on them. So without any effects, it sounds like this. Now what you can hear when I do that is that it sounds a lot less cohesive. It sounds like a layered snare, and that's not something you want. You don't want your snare to sound like a bunch of different ones. You want them to come together and act as one cohesive body to sound like one cohesive snare. So basically what I've done is initially I chucked on Transify, which is a transient shaper. Now, basically, for those of you who don't know what a transient shaper is just it can increase or decrease depending on what you do with it, the transient of a sound. The transient being the attack, like how punchy the sound is at the start. A transient in its general form is a spike in sound. So drums are transient by nature. They are spikes in sound. They happen very short and quickly. It goes from 0 to high to low again very quickly. So transient shapers are really good to add punch without increasing the overall volume of the snare. It just increases the start. Now ears hear that well. And then you can take it a step further and you can use a multi-band transient shaper like this one, where each of the frequency spectrums, I think this one is 0 to 200, 200 to 2000, 2000 to 5000, and then above 5000. Essentially, this allows me to increase the attack or the transient of each of these bands. So you'll notice what I've done is I've actually just completely dropped anything in terms of the attack below 200 here. Because at the start, you actually are having more of those high frequencies. Remember, drums by nature, they start at the top and they pitch down. It's a very fast pitch down. So we don't really need lows at the start. It's the same with a kick or anything. It happens, the lows come in a little bit later. So at the start, we don't need the lows, so I've dropped down the attack, so the transient of those lows. I've then also dropped down the mid-range because that knock is a little bit too high. If you hear it like this, you can hear that the highs are a lot less emphasized and it's a lot more low heavy. Now that's cool, but that will struggle to push through the mix and it will muddy up the mix because there's a lot more low information happening. So that'll clash more with your basses, even with a sidechain. Now remember, with all of my songs, I sidechain to the kick and the snare. So I've dropped down that lows a little bit, and then I've boosted the mids and the highs here. So without it, with it, see the highs just ring out a lot more. Now the next thing I added on was a kilohertz transient shaper. Now what I did with the kilohertz transient shaper is I didn't do anything to the attack. I basically just dropped the sustain down. So in any transient shaper, the attack is how punchy it is at the start, and the sustain is sort of the volume as it rings out. So you'll notice here as I turn up that to sustain, it's the end of the sound that's being changed. Now what I wanted to do was, because I found that a lot of the drums were finishing in different locations, it didn't sound that cohesive. So what I've done is I've chucked a transient shaper, a second one here, and I've dropped the sustain down. And what that is doing is it's causing it to be a much tighter snare, and it's dropping them all off at a similar volume. Because as we bring that sustain down, we sort of like push the volume back. So without it, with it. The next one I've done is I've added my cube rack, which you would have seen. Now what this has done is I'm dropping the side information. Because remember, your drums, specifically your kicks and your snares, you want them to be more mid-focused, because you want them to be very strong and powerful in your mids. So I've given it a bit of a mid boost by about nearly a dB, and I've dropped it by about 5 dB on the sides. It's got a little bit of reverb happening. I mean, that's at negative 42 dB there. So it's just a tiny bit in the very, very background. You're not really hearing it. I've high passed it at 100 Hertz, but there's no lows there. And then other than that, this isn't really doing anything. So what you'll hear is this also makes it more cohesive in the stereo field now. So before we were making it more cohesive in the sense of time, going from one point further in time to another one by adding that second transient shaper here that drops the sustain. Now we're making it more cohesive in the stereo field by, instead of having all the snares at different parts in the stereo field like this, I've dropped that side information and boosted the mid, so it pushes everything in a bit. And now it's sounding like a more singular snare in the middle. And then the last thing I've done is a soothe. Now what this is doing is it's really attacking the low region here of the snare. You can hear without it, that resonance in the lower area, it's still a bit hot, so I've added that in. Now we're leaving a lot of those like mids and highs, but we're attacking the lower part there. So that is essentially my approach to layering snares. Now you'll notice I didn't have to find some crazy ass samples. These are all pretty general, like they're 3 from the Noisier pack and then another one that I just used from another track. Sorry, 4 from the Noisier pack. So, no, 5 even. And then 1 from, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's 4 from the Noisier pack and 1 from an Excellent pack. So these are all from very well-known sample packs. You don't have to go and find some arbitrary stuff that no one else has found. But it's how you use each of them, and it's how you layer each of them and basically add them together in the EQ spectrum so that they complement each other and do different things, and then make them cohesive with transient shaping, increasing the transients and reducing some where you want, and then using mid-side to sort of bring it back into the center a bit, and then basically just like attacking the resonance. So then we go back to the full thing, and then the full drum loop again. So yeah, hope that helped you guys. Hope that gave you some tips. Cheers.